Good afternoon. My name is Dr. Brendan Long. I'm a Senior Research Fellow at Charles Sturt University, and I'm welcoming you to the podcast of The Long View. In The Long View, we look at the economics of the COVID crisis and its effect on the people of Canberra. And my guest today, and I'm very honoured to have this guest today, is the Chief Minister, Andrew Barr, who has obviously made such a contribution to the life of this city, both as Chief Minister and as a Cabinet Minister since 2006. So, Andrew, it's great to have you on.
Thanks very much, Brendan. Good to be here.
These podcasts, as I said, tend to focus on the economics of COVID. And, one of the important things that's just happened you have been able to outline the budget update with a new set of numbers and policy responses, which I believe was released last Thursday. So, Andrew, it might be just appropriate to outline some of the key messages from the budget update and some of the key outcomes and projections.
Terrific. Well, thanks, Brendan. Yes, so the objective really has been to align the Territory's fiscal policy with the monetary policy settings of the Reserve Bank of Australia and the very clear economic advice that all state and territory governments are receiving from the Reserve Bank Governor and indeed from our own heads of Treasury. And that is that we have to adopt an expansionary fiscal policy at this time. And really with three key priorities. One is income support, which principally sits with the Australian government, but there are various forms of assistance that state and territory governments have provided to people who've not received income support from the Commonwealth. And in our case, that has involved students, casual workers who've been with their employer for less than 12 months, asylum seekers, other people who are not eligible for Australian government assistance. So that's been one part of the economic response. Another has been to focus our new spend and our expansionary spend on elements that have a very high fiscal multiplier. And so the advice here has been that investment in infrastructure and support for lower income households has the highest fiscal multiplier, that not only increases aggregate demand in the economy, but also targets employment creation. And then the third element of the economic response has been to look at the regulatory side of government operations, and that's highlighted a number of reform areas, tax reform being one, planning reform being another, and then regulatory measures that we've adopted during the pandemic that could in fact be kept beyond the pandemic. And there's some practical examples in the ACT where we've undertaken some easing of regulatory responsibilities and requirements, for example, around the hospitality sector, where we've given greater flexibility around outdoor dining space to enable people to socially distance and yet let small businesses continue to have enough patrons to generate sufficient income for their business. It's been allowing particular hospitality venues to transfer licence types across different categories to reflect the fact that at various points in the pandemic, the public health directions have not allowed them to serve alcohol inside a venue or to serve alcohol to customers other than those who are seated. So we've allowed the takeaway sale of alcohol, for example, by licence holders. So they're just a couple of very practical examples of where we've introduced regulatory measures or relaxation of those measures during the pandemic that could be kept. In terms of the territory budget position, yes, we are running headline net operating deficits and will be over the forward estimates period, although deficits diminishing in size as the economic recovery kicks in. The principal economic advice from the RBA governor was that we really must focus our efforts in the next 2 years, so 2020-21 and 21-22, and that the primary objective of economic policy, both monetary and fiscal, is to reduce unemployment. And the very clear advice there is that whilst that will see a deterioration in our budgets in the short term, in the long term, it will in fact lead to a stronger budget position than if we did nothing and let the recession become a depression, and if unemployment stayed high for an increased period of time, that would in fact have a greater impact on our budgets and for obvious reasons would have a greater impact on society. Full employment is an admirable aspiration for governments, and arguably we had achieved that in the ACT prior to the pandemic. Our unemployment rate had fallen below 3%, and we had more job vacancies in the Territory than we had unemployed people. So that's something I think that we can strive to achieve again, and that's why we've set an ambitious jobs target of more than 250,000 jobs in the Territory economy by 2025. We're at just a little over 230,000 at the moment. We've got a pool of underemployment that we need to absorb. So I think in the short term, what will happen is that people who currently have some hours will get more hours. And then once they've got more hours, there's then an opportunity for employers to take on more staff. So that's the snapshot of the situation and the direction of policy. The Reserve Bank Governor has said interest rates are going to be at this historic low level for at least 3 years. So the cost of government borrowing is as low as it will ever be.
Yeah, and for a man who's thinking of taking on a new mortgage like myself, it's there are upsides to low interest rates, that's for sure. But thank you, Andrew, and that's comprehensive. I mean, like, you would probably never have imagined, as Treasurer as well as Chief Minister, that you'd be having to be in a position where you'd be looking at a deficit of about $1 billion. It's a fairly scary type of position, but I would have thought very much not alone in that situation of any treasurer in the country or even in the world. It's a time, I would have thought, when the fiscal conservatives, and I would normally be a fiscal conservative, have to put the sword of fiscal conservatism away and realise, as you say, that there is a time for the multiplier effects of the economy to take place. And, in my judgment, professional judgment as an economist, while the deficit, when you look at the headline deficit, it's high, it's actually quite manageable for the Territory. And it's not just manageable, but reasonable for the circumstances. In fact, were we to not be running a significant deficit, I think that we would not really have a credible employment policy. So, the question I think people sometimes raise is what the debt levels, but as you say, the debt levels are very much a function of interest rates. And something that's been clear in my mind is that we've retained a AAA rating.
Yes.
And that's got to be worth at least 25 basis points or something like that. So it's that it's a sort of it's not a good position to be in, but it's a better position, I suppose, than others. And how are we going compared to your colleagues around the national cabinet table? I mean, are they how's the ACT faring compared to the states and territories?
Well, look, our starting point was strong, as you've identified, with low levels of public debt, a AAA credit rating that we shared only with New South Wales and Victoria amongst the Australian states and territories. Look, the situation varies across the country, depending on starting points of jurisdictions and then also how much COVID has impacted on economies. So clearly, Victoria are having a very tough time at the moment. They started with a strong base like us, a AAA credit rating, and relatively low levels of public debt. But clearly, their situation is somewhat different from the other states and territories. For comparable jurisdictions with the ACT in terms of size of economy and size of budget, we're doing the Northern Territory is in a situation perhaps twice as significant as us in terms of net debt levels and headline net operating balance deterioration. Tasmania is similar to the ACT, expecting operating deficits of around $1 billion and with a level of net debt. When you then do the per capita comparisons with the other states, some were in a weaker starting point than the ACT, and their budgets have deteriorated sort of proportionally the same. What I think we're going to see, though, is that the mining resource jurisdictions will be in a stronger position than the service export economies because of the nature of the pandemic and what that does to some of the bigger export sectors, particularly in Southeast Australia. Look, our net debt was at about 7% of GSP and will probably double over the next 4 to 5 years to about 14-15%. The Commonwealth are now at 26% of GSP and will reach 45%. So compared to the Commonwealth, we're in a much sounder position. Now, granted, they of course have income taxing powers, so they've got the capacity to raise revenue in ways that we can't. But then we've also got a very strong asset base. So the net worth of the territory is very significant. And part of our economic recovery certainly will involve further asset sales, namely undeveloped land. And that presents investment opportunities for our economy and also opportunities to build new housing, both social housing, public housing, and new private housing. And that is also an economic driver for our city.
Yeah, that's the, what was the line in the Canberra Times? Barr the builder. Can he fix it? Well, you know, obviously construction is a sector where is capacity to absorb some of the underemployed and some of the slack that may happen in the labour market. So be that infrastructure or be that residential construction, it seems to be an obvious place to turn to. And the budget update did have some significant infrastructure investments in education, health, and transport. Some of these quite exciting for a candidate, for a person who lives in the Woden area. What were the key messages from the infrastructure section of the budget update?
Look, I think the important point is that this is an opportunity to bring forward some significant public infrastructure investment that leaves a lasting legacy. It's not an opportunity to dream up projects that have not been well thought through and had preparation work undertaken. So there are 3 main projects that we're pursuing at this time that are all in the Woden area. So the expansion of Canberra Hospital, the new Woden CIT and public transport interchange, and then the extension of light rail from the city through the Parliamentary Triangle to Woden are all long-term infrastructure projects on timeframes of delivery of 2022, 2024, and then beyond into the sort of the middle part of the decade. With each with its separate fiscal profile, but we had made provision within our forward infrastructure program and within our budget for these projects. So the fiscal planning for them has been many years in the making. Each will contribute hundreds and thousands of jobs in the construction phase, but then will also lead to ongoing employment and, importantly, increase the productive capacity of the territory economy. And the skills investment is particularly important at this time. There will be a pool of people for whom completion of Year 12 might have normally seen a gap year being taken. The options for international travel and the like are a bit less for young people at the moment. So we're expecting during the economic downturn that there'll be an increase in interest in education and training. Canberra is Australia's education capital, so it's both an opportunity for our economy in terms of attracting students, domestic students here, but also then churning out a very skilled workforce and adding to our labour productivity, which is already amongst the highest in the nation, but a skilled workforce in a high value employment context for a service-based economy really is where the ACT is positioned in terms of the Australian economy and indeed the economy in this sort of Southeast Asian region.
Yeah, it's I mean, especially the infrastructure and transport spend. I mean, it's a classic textbook Keynesian response. And I accept what you're saying that, like we just had, there's no new, there's no policies done on the run. It's really a bringing forward and a reshaping of the pattern of expenditure. But the extent to which we can bring forward infrastructure spends is, to me, seems to be exactly in line with what the Reserve Bank governor has called for state and territory governments to do. And of course, it's due to the low interest rates, but it's also because, as you say, fiscal policy has to take the slack. I mean, the economic impact of monetary policy, I think, is diminishing. And even when we're going to the creation of money, quantitative easing, which we're sort of doing, and massive buybacks of bonds, it's still not really going to have as big an effect, I think, in terms of immediate stimulus as a fiscal policy stimulus. So infrastructure seems to be the obvious place I would go first if I wanted to stimulate the economy. And of course, the next one is jobs. I mean, yeah, you're right. We economists talk about the NIRU, the non-accelerated inflation rate of unemployment, the unemployment rate where you can't push it down further than without creating inflation. Well, 3% is a pretty good outcome. I mean, I agree. That's full employment. Now, of course, we're not going to get that now, but we can get back to that. And so, what are some of the key elements of the job strategy in addition to the stuff you've already mentioned?
Look, I think there's a number of industry sectors that have a capacity for growth, and we have seen our economic base diversify over the last 5 years in particular. We recognise that some of those sectors are going to remain subdued in terms of their output or economic contribution whilst the public health directions remain in place. So it's difficult to restart international tourism with your borders closed. But domestic tourism, as the interstate travel restrictions are eased over, I hope, in the coming months, will present an opportunity for that sector that's very labour intensive. One of the other dynamics here is that we have some sectors of our economy that contribute significantly to the territory's gross state product, but aren't necessarily big employers. And then you have other sectors that have a smaller GSP contribution, but are big employers, particularly of young people. And one of the things that we're keeping an eye out on is structural changes in certain industry sectors as a result of the pandemic. This can manifest itself in, for example, commercial property, in retail, and then really in the fundamentals of how the city functions. It's possible to foresee a situation where you don't have everyone in commercial offices 9 to 5, Monday to Friday, again in the way that we did pre-pandemic. The flexibility of work, being able to work from home from certain days, the technology enables and facilitates that.
Yeah.
But then equally, you don't necessarily want a situation where people lose all contact with their workplace and work colleagues in a physical sense. So part of the thinking here also is around the operation of the city. At the moment, we have to build infrastructure to cope with 2 45-minute peaks. If you're able to to spread your transport load, your dispersal of people and movements around the city over a broader frame of hours, then that means you can get greater efficiency out of your existing infrastructure. And then it also means that future population growth can be accommodated in a way that doesn't put excess pressure on infrastructure. And there's countless examples of how cities have grown too fast in some parts of Australia and around the world. And Canberrans do put a very high premium on quality planning outcomes. And look, today I had the opportunity to visit the new ACT government office block in Dixon, which is co-located with a bus station and a light rail station in a somewhat decentralised employment location. It's not in the CBD, but it is a really good example of transport-oriented development and Canberra's polycentric employment basis, which sees nearly half the jobs in Canberra not in our CBD or parliamentary triangle, which makes us unique amongst Australian cities.
No, that's right. That's right. One of the things that I liked about our response is the fact that I've been concerned that there are gaps in JobKeeper, and particularly for some people in highly vulnerable groups. And I think so. The Jobs for Canberrans funds provided quite an opportunity to, fill the gaps that the Commonwealth has left. And I also note that that had a little bit of a top up too in the economic statement, which is good. I mean, that seems to me innovative policy, but one of the things I like most about it is it's potentially scalable. Now I know you've got a fund allocation at the moment, and we think things are going to get better within 12 months. But the economic recovery looks like 21, 22, according to the estimates, is looking like we're going to, maybe bounce back effectively to a trend growth rate to over a 12 to, around in the shorter period of time. But if that doesn't happen, in the worst case scenario, it seems to me the Jobs for Canberrans Fund is a scalable instrument. You might not want to have to top it up, but if you had to, there are options, I suppose, along those lines.
Yes, that's exactly right. And what it's highlighted is that yes, governments can respond quickly to identified needs, and all of the jobs in that program are value adding for our community, and they've been as diverse as the clean-up post bushfire in the Navaji National Park to more staff on our COVID hotline and our Access Canberra service centres to assist Canberrans with their day-to-day interactions with government. It's meant more COVID cleaning across public assets and infrastructure in schools, in settings of where there's a high number of people utilising facilities. And so it's reflected, I think, the diversity of the ACT government's employment base, because we are both the local government and the state government equivalent. We employ a very diverse range of occupations and people, and we have a need for a wide variety of skill sets. And so what the program has enabled is the sorts of things I've mentioned, as well as additional municipal maintenance. And people will have seen a very extensive program rolled out across Canberra suburbs of footpath maintenance, of all of those local government services that people want from the Territory government. It's seen the fast tracking of a number of those projects and programs that's created employment and at the same time delivered infrastructure that will be used for 20, 30, 40, 50 years into the future. My favourite example of this in a historic Canberra context is that during the Great Depression of the 1920s and early 1930s, a decision was made to build a swimming pool in Manuka, Manuka Pool. And 90 years on, it is still serving that community. So it's an example of public works that stand the test of time. It's a social infrastructure asset, but it has generated employment and an opportunity for young people over 9 decades now And
And
so
my
it's
wife's mother swam in it when she was a young girl, and she just passed away at the age of 86. So it's been around.
yes,
Team Long's enjoyed it.
exactly.
Oh, but no, it's a good example. I can't quite. We're almost out of time, but I just cannot leave the conversation without mentioning tax reform. I am a tax specialist, so, and I've always taken the view that the Henry Report's recommendations into broadening land tax, a broad-based land tax, represented the highlight of reform at the state and territory level. So there's been a little bit of tweaking, but the tax reform remains on track, Andrew.
Yes, so look, the research that we commissioned into the effectiveness of the reforms over the first 8 years has demonstrated that it's lifted economic output. So gross state product is higher. It's seen more expenditure in the economy, and it's contributed to an increase in investment in the territory economy. So the economic theory said that it would reduce a deadweight loss in terms of inefficient taxation on our economy. It has done that, and the cumulative impact of that is now more than $300 million of additional gross state product. So that's important. Also, the economic analysis has demonstrated that the increase in property transactions have been particularly focused on the second income quintile. So it's helped lower income households into home ownership. And the additional rates burden, which is part of the tax reform and has been controversial. But that tax system has been made more progressive, and most of the increased burden has been borne by the top 20% of income earners and the top quotient of wealth in the city. So, look, tax reform is difficult. I take some consolation from the fact that other state governments have commissioned their own reports in recent times, including the New South Wales Liberal government, and it's reached the same conclusions and suggested that the reforms that the ACT has pursued are the right ones. And so I look forward to the day when we have fellow travellers on the state and territory tax reform journey. But it's being talked about now. And that's good to see, and the ACT's proved that it's possible.
ACT's happy to lead the way on economic reform. Says well, that's what you'll get when you get two economists talking together. Look, Andrew, it's a tremendous opportunity to talk about what our response has been in this city to this extraordinary year, and the response in particular to COVID. So I just wanted to, thank you very much for making the time available. And just to say, if you had any one last comment that you'd like to make, just to wrap up our little discussion today, feel free.
Well, thank you, Brendan. It's a great pleasure to join you on the long view today. And I think this whole period has demonstrated why government matters and why who is in government matters. And as we head into the Territory's Festival of Democracy, people have had the opportunity to look at alternative economic policies and also look at how political leaders have managed this most extraordinary of years. I hope we don't have another year like it, and I hope that we are now on the path to economic recovery, and I believe the policies we put forward have been based on very sound economic advice and are the right policies for this time.
Great.
Terrific.
Andrew, thank you
very
again.
much. My pleasure. Thank you.